So for the past 2 weeks, I've been posting videos about art and labour. And the first one was about cinema. And the second one, last week's one, was about poetry. And the reason why I did this is because I watched Perfect Days, the Wim Wenders film. And I loved the film. But at the same time, I felt that the film aestheticised and took a middle class eye viewpoint of labour, of particularly the kind of work that's featured in Perfect Days, which is toilet cleaning. Now, I'm not going to give away everything about that film, all the subplots and stuff like that. You can watch the video instead. And then the week after, I spoke about how the similar thing happens in poetry. And now today, I'm going to talk about video games, labour and video games. And the reason why I want to talk about this, and the reason why I've divided it into these three, I was thinking about these art forms. Let's start with that one slap bang in the middle, which is poetry. And poetry, in some ways, it's been my career. It's been something I've been doing since I was since I was a child, really, but something I've been trying to do as a big part of my life since my early 20s. And it's still a big part of my life. It's still part of how I earn a living. And I think that it will never leave me. I'll always have poetry as part of my soul. One thing I love about poetry is there's no money in it. But there's also, it doesn't cost anything to get involved in poetry either, most of the time. You just write. You can write down on a scrap of paper, you can write down on anything. Now, cinema is different for me because I, as a poet, I have to say, I steal from cinema all the time. And I think if you're involved in any kind of art form, having another art form to steal from is really important. I think you can get too sucked into the genre conventions of your own art form if all you're seriously taking inspiration from is just the other practitioners of that art form. And I'm also, there was a point when I was much younger, again, late teens, early 20s, where I thought I was going to become a filmmaker. And I experimented with video, and I had my own camcorder that I bought with my student loan. And I did try, and I made a few films, and they were pretentious and arty. And I have no idea whether I should have gone to film school instead, but it was an interesting part of my career. But once I'd finished my studies, I realised that it was going to be very difficult to make a living as an arty filmmaker at the time because of the technology that was needed, such as an editing suite, for example. Wasn't as accessible for me as it is now when I can just do this on an iPad. But back then, so I knew that I couldn't. It was going to be a struggle. I knew it was going to be a struggle, especially someone from a working class background. I knew that it wasn't going to be easy, and then that a lot of people, not everybody, a lot of people who were working in film were often from more well-to-do backgrounds. Although, to be fair, there was, for a certain amount of time, a lot of people came into film from the technical side of things, so they were more tradesman-like and more working class. So when you do have some working class directors, and it's because they came from that more technical end of things, and they worked their way up until they were directing, which is cool. I'm not going to talk about that too much. But poetry was something, at least, where firstly I found, because I studied art, and what I found was that when I studied art, I wasn't able... Whenever I really wanted to express myself, it was always through writing poetry. It was never through doing a painting or something like that. So, or even, to be fair, I mean, video was part of it. But ultimately, when I really needed to get something off my chest, I picked up my notepad and I started writing. And I think that's always been a part of me today. As much as I try and disavow my poetry vocation and sometimes career and sometimes lifestyle, it's always a part of me and I can't get rid of it. Now, when I wasn't doing poetry, I was working, proper working. I did all the jobs. When I first moved to London, I had a bonus from a company that I'd been working as a gardener for before. And so when I moved from the outskirts of London to closer into London, I had about a month. I got a bonus from this company, which was amazing, and that gave me perhaps a month's time to find another job. I had some mates put me up, and within that month I was working, but I was doing whatever work I could get my hands on, and a lot of that was quite physical. It was quite precarious, and I was not making a lot of money at all, but I was just making enough to sort out food, bills, rent, that kind of thing, and then maybe have a bit left over, a few quid, to go out on the tiles and do my poetry gigs and stuff like that. And I did that that became a more stable gardening job. But for a good part of a decade, I was working a lot of casual labour. Now, this is the background of why I've been making these videos. So I have an involvement in all of these art forms, but I've not spoken about video games. So what is it about video games? What I love about video games, and I have attempted to make video games, but not in any serious capacity, just did it for fun. The game was awful. It was a complimentary piece to an essay that I wrote about death and my thoughts about mortality and my hobby of thinking about death. And I loved it because it was just fun and stupid. And it was one of the first times I really didn't take myself very seriously when I was making a work of art, and didn't have to think of myself as great at this thing or having to contend with greatness when I was making it. And that's what I loved about it. But what I love about video games is that, and there's something that I've only rediscovered in my life. Maybe, I think 2017, when not long after my second child was born, and I saw that the Nintendo Switch was released, and I realised, I could sit on a couch with this thing and play games, because I had started going into mobile gaming again. So I was very into gaming when I was still at home, when I was a kid. But it was a very expensive hobby to have, so I fell off gaming quite hard. And it was only when phone gaming and tablet gaming came about, I started gaming again, and then I got a Switch, and then I got an Xbox, and now I've got a Steam Deck. And I also like little retro handhelds as well. So I'm back into my gaming, but I'm probably still a casual gamer by most people's approximations. All these people with their super massive, super powerful, water-cooled PC rigs. Then I'm not one of them, and I don't think I ever will be. But gaming, what I love about gaming is that as an art form, it's the thing I have no aspiration for. So if film serves me in two ways, which is my old shattered dream of becoming a filmmaker when I was younger, but also as the art form that I steal from the most. I really do. I love the imagery of films. I love the visual vocabulary of films, and I'm always looking for tricks within films to cut out the film and put into the structure of a poem. My poems are always very visual in a lot of my collections, and sometimes a lot of my poems are like a scene from a film when they're not autobiographical. But games, I don't know what it is, it's different. I love games, but I feel no inclination to become a game designer at all. And I steal a little bit from games, but I don't steal as much as I do from cinema for my poetry. And I'd love to find more ways to steal from games, but for now I like it that there's that sense of distance. And so that's a really roundabout way of saying that this is me talking about the art form that I find to be the most fun. And the thing that really is just purely recreational for me, even though I respect it as an art form. And so I want to start talking about video games and labour, and in some ways how it contrasts with other art forms writing about labour or making films about labour, and the things it gets right, the things that gaming is able to do because of the capacity of interaction that happens between the player and the world that's been created and the story they've been plonked into and the non-player characters that they are engaging with as well. So the first thing I always think of when I think about, the first thing I think about is actually the second game I'm going to talk about, but I want to have a little bit of preamble talking about another game. A little game you might have heard of called Animal Crossing New Horizons. And there will be shelves in public libraries that will just be devoted to the intersection between this game and its conditions of release, which was during the pandemic. And I remember this massive craze for Animal Crossing during the pandemic, and having a few friends who also had Animal Crossing New Horizons, and it released at the right time in some ways. Well, the right time for Nintendo, maybe not the right time for all of us. I think we all would have rather have been seeing our loved ones and have other people still alive actually, and all these other things, rather than being able to play a video game in its optimal release conditions. I'm sure it would have been a massive hit anyway. But what was it about Animal Crossing that made it a massive hit during the pandemic? I think the obvious thing was that it was so escapist. It was so purely escapist. And the idea of being outside in an island when you're only able to go outside for an hour every day, and the idea of friendship as well, meeting new people, making friends, when again that wasn't really happening. And I've already moaned a little bit about how much I hate Zoom as an instrument of social interaction, because it's already an instrument of work interaction, and therefore it's like going to your office building to have a night out. I just always think that has been a problem with Zoom, and I wish a lot more people in literature and poetry were a bit more brave and tried out stuff like Twitch instead during the pandemic, but instead we had these very dry Zoom poetry readings instead. Animal Crossing struck a contrast with all of that, because it was purely escapist. It was this lovely island, and you could spend your time doing little chores and jobs about this island. You could invite friends to your island. You could visit their island as well. You couldn't really do the group chat thing over it. You couldn't do voice chat, but sometimes you could just have WhatsApp open, or Discord or something else where you could just have a chat with your friend while you're playing Animal Crossing with them at the same time. So the game doesn't always have to supply that functionality to you. So it was a game, if you don't know it, it's a game where you end up on an island and you're starting your new dream life on the island, but you have a tent. You don't even have a house, you have a tent, and soon you realise that you are a kind of serf to a tanuki raccoon called Tom Nook. And Tom Nook, as cute as he is with his little voice going, I can't do his voice, but as cute as he is, he does begin extorting you almost immediately. So he is like a corporate overlord, but at the same time he's a benevolent corporate overlord. And there's something very satisfying about just walking about the island, and the way in which Animal Crossing is designed. It's not really designed to have you take on these really long chores and spend ages grinding to get resources. So when you hit a certain amount of rocks, a certain number of rocks on your island, you can get so much ore for them, and then that's it. They're exhausted until the next day. Same with all the trees that you run around shaking, grabbing fruit. Yes, you can create more activities for yourself, and the game certainly expanded the number of things that you could do partway through. But ultimately, it was designed that you didn't spend all your time there. It wasn't a massive time sink. You revisited every day, and it was this slow, cumulative, rewarding thing as well. So I can understand the appeal of the game during a pandemic, because the vibes were so... there's a term that that's used in gaming called cozy. It's a very cozy game, making friends with all of these islanders, all these cute animals. They run up to you excitedly when they see you, and they teach you a new emotional way of expressing yourself where a little image appears above your head. And my kids still love the game, and the number of hours that they have put into it is ridiculous. Hundreds and hundreds of hours. It's the most played game on my Switch console. I think the only other game that I've played for more hours is Slave Aspire, which is a card battler, which is available on all consoles, and it's amazing. But I bring up Animal Crossing because I think people think about the escapist qualities of being outside and seeing friends, and it offering all those things in a pandemic that we weren't offered. But the other thing that Animal Crossing offered is a wholesome view of work, in the sense that work is rewarding. It's something that you're not really able to turn into this long grind because of how the game is designed. Now, that said, I and others did turn it into a long grind, because if you caught scorpions and tarantulas, you could sell them for a lot of money. And there was a point when you could go to another island which is full of resources, and all you had to do was just chop down everything, and you could gather resources on another island. But what you could do is you could use tickets to visit all these islands, and people found out that you could spawn. Yeah, you had to go for a few islands, but you would find one that constantly spawned these tarantulas and these scorpions. And if you did that, you could make tons of bells, which is the currency. So that wasn't really the intention of the game. And I can't remember whether they changed it. I think they lessened the spawn rates, because they really didn't want you going in there and grinding and becoming very rich in your bells and trying to cheat your way through other parts of the game, even though it's not really cheating, because you are working legitimately within the game's mechanics. You're just exploiting them, that's all. And so they wanted to keep that coziness, so I think they made these little sojourns to these islands a bit less rewarding. So work was there, but there was an implicit message within the game, which is don't overwork yourself. There's only so much work, and then you should do things like make friends of islanders, and even switch off your console and maybe go for that hour-long outdoor activity that your government has sanctioned to do during the time of plague. So Animal Crossing was a great phenomenon, and obviously part of that was the pandemic, but part of that was a very cozy idea of what work can be. And there were some friends of mine who were definitely feeling FOMO because they didn't have a Nintendo Switch, and therefore they felt that they were missing out. And to all those people, I always said the same thing: buy Stardew Valley. Stardew Valley. It's a game that you can just run on anything nowadays. You can play it on PC, you can play it on console, you can play it on your iPhone, you can play it on your Android phone. There's a lot of places where you can play Stardew Valley, and that's what I said to people. If you're feeling like you're missing out with Animal Crossing, get Stardew Valley. Now, Stardew Valley really is a game that you can grind on, and you start off in Stardew Valley as someone who inherits a farm from your dead uncle, I think. Your uncle's died, he's left you a farm, and you get there and it's all run down, it's just a patch of dirt, and you've got a bag of seeds. And from those modest beginnings, you get to work. You have a limited amount of energy per day. You hoe the land, you till the land, you sow the seeds, you water your seeds, and then you go out and you make friends with all the people in the town. And it's one of those games where you do all these things till the end of the day, and then you take your character to bed, because if you don't get to bed on time, they will pass out and they will be charged by the villainous Joja Corp, who will pick you up because it's some kind of weird privatised healthcare thing going on there. I know that's the default state in some country, but please remember that I am from the UK, where we have the tyranny of socialised medicine. But you go about the town, you chop wood, you do all this stuff. You can be really, really, really busy. And as I said, I've mentioned the Joja Corp. And the Joja Corporation is this massive corporation that already have a big supermarket in the town, and that's the Joja Mart. And the man who's from the corporation is very evil. And one of the first forking paths, I'm not swearing, it's a path that forks, okay, one of the first forking paths that you have within the game is that there's the man who runs the shop, Pierre, there's the Joja Mart, and then there's the rundown, dilapidated community centre. And one of the first choices is you can do all these little tasks to re-establish the community centre. And you can join forces with the corporation and allow all the organic businesses in the town to suffer. But the corporation will end up owning the town instead. Now, I think most people, what they do is they take the community centre option. And so within the game, there is a mechanic. Yes, you're working, but also there is the value of your work in the sense of the community that you're serving. And so the mechanic of the game, in some ways, well, I won't go into the mechanics, but the storyline, the closest thing the game has to a main storyline is about whether you'll become one of these corporate sellouts or whether you will build up the community and you'll have your business within the community. And so it has a sort of, even if you take the corporate option, the corporate people aren't nice. They're not portrayed as nice. So in that sense, the game has a, dare I say, an anti-capitalist ethics within it, in the sense of capitalism being bigger people and companies draining even more value from people and their work and not redistributing that value among communities. Before I get onto anything else, I will make a short point which was about my previous videos, which is many of my videos centered on the contradiction. So in my poetry and labour and my cinema and labour videos, I spoke about how there is a tension between the way in which work can be rewarding, especially physical work can be rewarding. It can be laborious, but there can be a sense of flow and even satisfaction in the work that you're doing, even during some of the most unpleasant jobs. And I have certainly experienced this myself. And that was partially the message that Perfect Days has. But the problem with Perfect Days, and I still love that film, and I will definitely rewatch it many times because I love the spiritual aesthetic experience of the film, but the film does not engage at all with the labour struggle. it sanitizes things in a very literal sense because it's about toilet cleaners, but also it sanitizes things because it doesn't really cast what's happening within a labour struggle. So I found that there are works of art that sometimes really portray that satisfaction of repetitive labour in a cinematic way, and poetry can do that as well. But at the same time, there is the context of the struggle. And one poet I spoke about last week, who I felt that captured that really well, was Fred Voss, in the sense that he really does well in communicating the sense of flow within his work that he attains, and that satisfaction of doing this laborious, dangerous work as well. And at the other end of things, there is still the communication of the exploitation and the alienation from the fruits of his labour. And so I'm setting that up because I want to say that the thing with Stardew Valley is that even though the storyline is anti-capitalistic, there is definitely that idea of the meritocratic capitalist and, dare I say, American dream within the game, which is that you start off with a bag of seeds and a patch of dirt. And that's what I started off with. And then within a few game years, I've started from those seeds, and now I have diamond. I have a shed that just has these little machines that are replicating diamonds. Now you could say it's not capitalistic, because obviously if diamonds were that easy to make, then they would lose their value and I wouldn't be able to sell them for the stupid amounts of money. And so I was very rich in my game. So in some sense that's the capitalist dream, isn't it? Might not be the capitalist reality, but it is the capitalist dream, where bag of seeds, patch of dirt, next moment massive farm, crops, automation, diamond manufacturer. All of these things, I'm super rich. One of my says in the game, I'm just this obscenely wealthy person. I'm probably more rich than the Joja Corporation with my farm and my precious resource replication technology that I don't seem to be sharing with the world. So I think there's a contradiction at the heart of Stardew Valley, which is a game I love. It's a game, as I said, it's so compulsive. You play the game and you get to an end of the day and then you hear the cock crow, and then the music starts playing. The music, the graphics, the pixel art, everything about this game is beautiful. The relationships between the characters. It's not like this game didn't exist before. It's very heavily based and inspired on the Harvest Moon games, and it's been copied so much after. But Stardew Valley just has that balance of this game where you just feel really involved in this world, and you can never quite... At some point you go to sleep, you wake up and you go, okay, I'm not going to actually get up, I'm going to stop, I'm going to save the game, and then next time you go into play it starts from the beginning of that day anyway. I was up until the early hours just going around watering crops, working, and that's been the interesting thing about this game, is because it's one of those examples of a game where work is the main pleasure of the game and you just spend ages working. And many people talk about how the fact that they will get back from their actual job, which they'll be exhausted, it'll be laborious, whatever job that they've done, they get back home from work, and then they open up Stardew Valley and they start working again on their farm. Now, this idea of a game where you actually work, there's a certain genre that really goes just for the nub of this idea of grabbing that satisfaction of labour, especially of repetitive labour and repetitive tasks, and turning it into a very immersive and compulsive game. And that genre is the dad game. Now, the dad game normally is based on one particular task or one particular job, or a gameplay loop that involves one particular job, normally involving you doing the task well enough that you make money, and then you can unlock better equipment to do the task with. So perhaps the most famous example of this would be a game like Euro Truck Simulator, where you're a trucker and you're just in your truck and you're just doing these long haul truck driving missions where you drive from one part of Europe to another, and they've done an American version too, and you just haul things and you deliver them, and that's what you do. And I think these games, and there's others as well, like Power Wash Simulator, Lawnmower Simulator, and they're all based on those particular things of doing a particular task, a particular job. I often wonder why these games are called dad games. And I think it's perhaps because your average dad, maybe he works a white collar job. maybe he does not work the particular job that's done here. I don't know if real truck drivers, unless they're trying to do a fancy post on Reddit where they show themselves playing Euro Truck Simulator while driving their truck through Europe. I don't know if that's real. It could be interesting if it was real, but I don't know. I'm guessing a lot of the dads, the titular dads that play dad games, probably do different work. Maybe they do office jobs, and then they have this fantasy. So they have their own work. They have their work. Their office jobs are better paid. Maybe not so much now. Skilled labour is very well paid in some quarters, but still. They have this fantasy where they don't have the supervisor breathing down their neck, where maybe they're outdoors or they're just staring down a long highway and they got their haul and they're just driving, maybe they're listening to their music, and there's that sense of freedom. And I think that is a genuine freedom that comes from work. It is oxymoronic, the idea of freedom within employment and freedom within labour. But there is freedom as in your head is not full of particular things. You're just completely immersed in the task, and in some ways you are independent. Some particular jobs, no one's breathing down your neck, no one's making demands of you. You've just got that job to get on with. Now, I would hazard to guess that that is not the reality of truck driving. I'm pretty sure there are plenty of issues. I think you're probably working on a very tight schedule. There's the isolation. There's probably the irregular sleeping hours. There are probably things that are very satisfying about the job, but there's other things that probably aren't as satisfying. And you probably have to keep a good check on your mental health when you're doing those jobs as well. The dad game is a particular genre, but I think the dad game is a great genre because it appeals to dads. It appeals to people whose working lives are not perhaps as simplistic and as immediately rewarding. I think when you've batted out just a bunch of emails and filled in a few like some spreadsheets, it's not the same kind of feeling that when you've just mowed a bowling green. And I have done that. I wasn't very good at it because you have to be really precise with those stripes as you're going up and down. But God, it was wonderful mowing a bowling green. The best thing was I remember that you have to kind of swing the thing round in order to get the next line down. And it's almost a kind of ballet with this machine where you have to master this swing round motion and then head back up in that perfect straight line. You can see why a game could be made out of and what satisfaction can be wrought from that labour. But the problem is it's a similar Stardew Valley problem in a way, is in the sense that a lot of the dad games take place without that sense of alienation. It's an ideal world where you are doing these tasks, you're getting paid, you're upgrading your equipment, you're making even more money. You're playing that idea that you can start off from simple beginnings and just through good old elbow grease and building up your skill, you will just move upwards and the ceiling is endless, it's limitless. But you're well paid for the work and the pay goes higher and the satisfaction becomes higher and the skill becomes higher. And it's not always like that, is it? It's not always like that. And so I do ask myself, is there a game that perhaps captures... I'm sure there's more than this one game, but there's one game that really springs to mind that I think, as perhaps more than any other work of art I know, captures this tension and this contradiction between how satisfactory manual labour can be and the alienating conditions within which that manual labour is situated. And the game that does this is a game called Hardspace Shipbreaker, which I played a couple of years ago. And the premise of the game is that you're someone who is you're working in a spaceship dismantling yard, and this yard is in orbit of a planet. It's just outside a planet normally, so you're in space, people dock these spaceships, and then it's your job to use these, you're there in your little jetpack, and you're just going around, it's all in first person, and you're just taking a ship apart. And you're going inside the ship and you're just pulling things out, and then you've got these two feeds that you have to put the equipment in. So some equipment has to be thrown away and incinerated, some equipment can be recycled, and then there's precious materials that you can cast into this net below you, and you're just floating about. And everything about this game, as far as that gameplay is concerned, is so very satisfying, even though sometimes you're risking cutting through fuel tanks, coolant pipes. Sometimes if you don't depressurize the ship properly, a particular point, you get blasted out and you're flying away. And so all these accidents can happen, and you can even get killed. And perhaps the biggest risk is that some of the ships have a nuclear fission engine within the ship that you have to very, very, very carefully remove. And once you cut it loose, you have a certain amount of time to transfer it into this little drop-off zone before it explodes and destroys the entire the entire facility. So there's a hint at the alienation that goes on there and the danger of the work. Still really satisfying. Now, when you do die, which will happen at some point, set on fire or whatever, then your body is recreated by the corporation that you are working with. And it turns out, and this is where the game nails it, is that you are being exploited by this corporation. You start off in massive debts. You might as well be indentured. It's very much an indentured job. And so you've taken this job, I think, to help your family back home and send money back home. But you're there, you're out in space. So in some ways you are alienated personally as well. And I think the company are looking over your emails, and you are being exploited. Every time you die, they reconstitute your body. I guess your consciousness is uploaded every night when you go to bed, and they will just immediately download your consciousness to this other body, and you can get out there and start working again. But you have to pay off. You're charged for that service, and that's added to the debt that you have to pay off. Now, it turns out that there's an overseer that's sent down from the company as well. I think it's the Lynx Corporation. Could be wrong. But you are being exploited. And in the background, there's the stirrings. You start getting these emails from people who want to campaign for better workers' rights and even unionize. And I love it that this is part of the game. So you're doing this work. The work in its own way is very satisfying, but at the same time, it takes place within a greater narrative framework where you are being exploited, where you are being alienated from your labour, and that you're part of an ongoing storyline where at the same time you are communicating with people via, I guess, messaging services and email, while trying not to get the attention of a corporation in ways that you're trying to advocate for workers' rights. And I won't give away the plot details, but it gets very, very dramatic. And even though you're still going and doing this really immersive work, you're always aware of the backdrop. You're always aware of the narrative ongoing and the struggle of workers. And so, hey, if you want to do a game or make a work of art that features that contradiction between labour and how satisfying labour can be, even the arduous labour, while at the same time the exploitation that is happening in the background and the alienation that's happening from the background, then Hardspace Shipbreaker, I think, is the game that absolutely nails it. And that's the direction I think to maybe take art within as well. And it'd be interesting to see if this could be reproduced in cinema. It has been reproduced in poetry, and it probably has been reproduced in cinema, particularly world cinema, that I haven't watched. So I'm going to leave it there. So that's enough from me and my little updates. These are the bits that always get skipped at the end of the video. Hope you're having a good one, and hopefully I'll see you next week. And I've got a feeling these videos might end up being posted midweek instead. Not sure. Just so I can film them at the weekend and I have a bit more time to edit them. I think that might be better for me. So I think we're moving to a different time frame where essays will go up on the Sundays, and then the videos will move from Sundays to maybe Tuesdays or Wednesdays. So this is my heads up for that. Thank you for watching. Whatever you're doing, whatever work you're involved in, I hope you're finding satisfaction. And if you are being exploited, there's always little ways and big ways of fighting the power. Maybe join a union. That's what I would say. Have a good one. Bye bye.